Well, we've got round 17 of the 2021 GT Cup Championship coming up at Donington Park in just a few moments' time. The cars have been released onto the grid for what is the first of two sporting sprint races that we'll have over the course of this weekend, one of which will take place today, the other of which will take place tomorrow. Same format as ever, if you're used to tuning in, is that we see sprint race and a pit stop race each day. Round 17 of the championship coming up, and a full grid of cars as good as at Donington Park, with all of the various classes represented. 6 classes nowadays we have in the GT Cup Championship, catering for pretty much everything that we have. The GT3 class is for GT3 homologated cars. The GTO class is for open specification cars, so that's a low volume manufacturer built cars. It could be GTE2 cars or GTE cars that sit in there, or modified challenge cars. We have Group GTC, which is for later model challenge cars, so that's for things like Lamborghini Super Trofeos or maybe even Ferrari challenge specification cars. GTB is for earlier challenge cars, so we'll see the likes of the Porsche 911s, GT3 Cup cars sitting there, and the fabulous Marcos Mantis cars that we have out. Group GTH is for the GT4 homologated cars, and Group GTA is for lower specification Cup and Challenge cars, and will make series cars, which largely nowadays in the entry list is for Ginetta Super Cup cars, the G55 Super Cup specification cars. So a range of cars out there. The vast majority have been with us for the course of the season. There are a few invitational cars that are on the grid for this weekend, and one of them has lined up on the outside of the front row of the grid. We've seen plenty of Morgan Tilbrook and Marcus Clutton sharing the number 66 Mercedes over the course of this season, but they brought out their GT3 McLaren. There it is, look, the GT3 McLaren. And really what they're doing is the GT Cup Championship has been their home in Group GTH, but they've changed car for this weekend because they're also concentrating on the British GT Championship, and that is here in a few weekends' time. So they're using this almost as a sneaky testing session. And we'll look forward to seeing how they get on. Morgan did a really good job in qualifying that Zip Cap prepared car and supported car onto the outside of the front row of the grid. We'll guide you through the grid in a few moments' time, and as the last few officials and team representatives are cleared from the grid, this is a 25-minute race that will be coming up for round 17 of the championship. It is also not just for the overall championship, we've also got the sprint championship, so that is for just the sprint races that we have each day, and leading that in terms of the championship standings on 122 points is the Porsche number 35 of Nick Phelps from the number 67 Ginetta of Simon Orange, who is 10 points adrift. That's the Sprint Cup Championship. In terms of the overall championship, well, it's the car that starts from pole position, which is Richard and Sam Neary. Richard is driving in this race that will start from pole. So we'll give you the grid then. No graphic to bring up, but we'll just guide you through the grid and the way that they line up. Car number 88, Richard Neary, starts from pole position. Alongside is number 66, which is Morgan Tilbrook. Row 2 of the grid is the Radical local man from just down the road at Nottingham. Number 7, Steve Burgess, lines up alongside 41, which is Tim Morley, who joins James Simons for this weekend. Row 3 of the grid is 61, John Dillon, and number 4, which will be Graham Tilley. And row 4 of the grid sees number 33, the G-Cat Racing Porsche return in the hands of Seamus Jennings. Alongside will be 113, which should be Tom Webb of the two Webb brothers for this race. Row 5 of the grid is 9, that is Warren Gilbert. Driving solo this weekend, Warren. Jensen Lunn, who owns the car and shares the car with Warren, was taken into hospital and had a fairly major operation earlier on this week. I know you'll be watching from hospital, Jensen. Everybody here at Donington Park and everybody from Butte Motorsport and the GT Cup wishes you all the very best with your recovery, and we hope to see you back behind the wheel very soon indeed. So Warren Gilbert lines up alongside Paul Bailey in the SB Race Engineering. We'd usually say Brabham, but for this weekend it's the McLaren GT3 Can-Am that he's got out. The Brabham, there's some parts that are on back order at the moment, so we're hoping that we might see that car back out at Snetterton, but if we don't, I'm sure we'll see this fantastic McLaren Can-Am out, one of only three cars, there it is, the number 28 car that was ever built, based on an MP4-12C, but was built for regulations for a series that was scheduled to take place in America. Chassis number 1, it's only done 500 kilometres, that car, so great to see it out there. And row 6 of the grid, it's the second of the two G-Cat Racing Porsches. Number 25, David Shaw, lines up alongside 5, which is Richard Chamberlain. Row 7 is 24, which is Andre Borodin, alongside 56, which is Roy Millington. And row 8 sees 35, Nick Phelps, the championship leader in the Sprint Cup, line up alongside the Group GTH, Ginetta number 1 in the hands of Josh Jackson. Both Nick Phelps and Josh Jackson qualified on pole in reality in their respective groups. The next row of the grid is row number 9, 74, Charles Clark, new to the series for this weekend, alongside 26, which is Tom Rawlings in this race, and row 10 is going to be the number 212 car of Chris Hart alongside 15, David Holloway. We'll leave it there though, because we are about to get this race very shortly underway. A rolling start, remember, for round 17 of the 2021 GT Cup Championship here at Donington Park on the Grand Prix circuit. Enormous variety as ever, with so many different marks represented on the grid, and we're about to get our first of 4 races in the GT Cup Championship underway. The black Mercedes of Richard Neary on pole position, the largely white and orange McLaren of Morgan Tilbrook sitting alongside. Red lights are on the gantry, and when the lights go out, which they do now, the cars rocket themselves up towards Redgate Corner. Richard Neary with a good start. Remember, that car is the overall championship leading car as well, the Mercedes. Steve Burgess, I think, in the Radical might just sneak through into second place there as the rest of the cars all file their way up towards Redgate Corner for the first time, where everybody, I think, has been sensible. Somebody has run wide, and that's Richard Neary, the pole sitter, runs wide at Redgate Corner all over the grass, and that has dropped that car way down through the order, outside of the top 10 and possibly even outside of the top 15. He's amongst the Group GTH cars at this stage, so the GT3 Merc has got some work to do here in the hands of Richard Neary as he files past Tom Rawlings. There's a spin in the background, I'm afraid to say, and it might have been possibly Carl Cavers that went around, but for the number 88 Mercedes of Richard Neary, the championship leader, that is not the start to the race that he wanted. It was Carl Cavers that went round in the background, so thankfully the Beluga Motorsport Porsche Cayman has recovered. So Richard Neary with work to do here, picking his way still through some of the GTH competitors, and the extra power of the Mercedes will tell, so makes light work of the reigning champion, Josh Jackson. But everybody else, I think, is safely through the first lap without too much trauma. There is the number 41 car, that's Tim Morley that's on board that car for this weekend, sharing with James Simons. Had a really good qualifying session, did Tim Morley. We've seen him racing in things like VLN in the past and the LNS series, which is the Nürburgring long distance series in reality, but the first lap is going to be chalked into the book. Radical leads in the hands of Steve Burgess, Lamborghini second, McLaren third, Porsche fourth, Lamborghini fifth, and Nissan completes the top 6 as Richard Chamberlain dives at the inside of Warren Gilbert's car to take a place away. That will be a change for 7th and 8th. Richard Neary concludes the first lap of the race down in 11th position, 12th position, I'm afraid to say. So there's number 9, Warren Gilbert. That will please him that Richard Neary is behind, because that car is right up there in the championship standings. Richard Neary and Sam Neary on 388 points coming into this weekend, and for Warren Gilbert and Jensen Lunn, who will be watching on from his hospital bed, 351 from them. I think everybody's safely through the first lap of the race. There goes the number 82 car. That will be James Guess, running in Group GTH. He's been sharing the car with various drivers over the course of the season, and it will be Tom Canning that's back on board that number 82 car for the pit stop races over the course of this weekend. So down and in towards the braking area for the S's. There goes the Mercedes of Richard Neary, still trying to make progress. There's the number 24 McLaren. Roy Millington's Ferrari sitting behind. Seamus Jennings doing a really good right. Richard Chamberlain starting to make some more progress here, so that is another position that he has gained there. The Porsche rockets its way through and past Graham Tilley's Nissan. So Richard Chamberlain started this lap in 8th position. I think he's going to finish it in 6th place, Richard, returning to the championship. Missed a few rounds because of issues with the Porsche. Great to see him back. Yeah, he's up to 6th position. Picked off both Warren Gilbert and Graham Tilley on that lap. So this up towards us now was going to be Warren Gilbert fighting away. Instead, we now look back at what's going on with James Townsend fighting away. For the lead of the race, though, Steve Burgess is starting to sprint away to a degree, whilst John Dillon, who is now in 2nd place, is coming under attack from Morgan Tilbrook. So both of those cars weaving their way through McLean's corner. John Dillon in the GT3 Lamborghini, the GT3 McLaren of Morgan Tilbrook sitting behind. I've got to say, Morgan Tilbrook is a driver who really has come on so well over the course of this last season or so, under the tutorage of Marcus Clutton, the pro that shares the car with him. Morgan weaving from one side to the other. He's got the run here, I think. Is he going to be able to sneak his way through? Yes, he has. Through goes Morgan Tilbrook up into second position once more. The Lamborghini dropping down into third. And can he hang on to it on the exit? Yes, he can. So it's Radical from Lamborghini, from McLaren as they head round through the Melbourne hairpin, with 20 minutes of the scheduled 25 still remaining at this stage. Steve Burgess was leading by around about 1.5 seconds at the start of the lap. Now, did John Dillon make a small mistake there? I think he did. Mid-corner there, the Lamborghini just seemed to wash out wide a little bit. So over the start-finish line now come. Morgan Tilbrook, with daylight between himself and the Lamborghini, took the place away from Seamus Jennings, doing good jobs at the wheel of the GCAT Racing Porsche that sits there in fourth position. Fifth place is the leading Group GTC car at the moment, which is Tim Morley, but this car here leads the race overall and leads Group GTO, which is Steve Burgess. A multiple Radical champion over the years is Steve Burgess, and was also, would you believe, a former champion in British quad bike racing some years ago was Steve Burgess. So through the right-hander, Steve is at his local circuit. He lives just down the road at Nottingham. 45 years of age now is Steve. Car prepared by Rob Weldon's team, Raw Motorsport, and in the hands of the Radical Clubman's Cup champion from 2015, the former Radical Challenge champion. He was a runner-up in the European Championship as well, was Steve, some years ago. He's out front and leading the way. Now there is James Guess, who's had a spin, I'm afraid. Now there's damage to the right-hand side of that Aston Martin. Now, was that because of where he went through the gravel, or was, in fact, the front splitters all ripped off it as well? Was that contact that caused the spin, or was it the spin that caused the damage? Simply don't know. So that will have dropped him down through the order at this stage. Another thing that could well be worth watching is the lead battle for Group GTH at the moment. That's being led by the number 1 McLaren, but there are cars queuing up behind it for the lead of the group. So 18.5 minutes of the race to go. In towards the braking area for the Fogarty S's come the raft of the Group GTH cars. Over the start-finish line comes Richard Neary, who has that lap got past Graham Tilley. So that's another place gained by the Mercedes. It's now up into 7th place, having started from pole position. Graham Tilley drops down into 8th. Now, for Richard Neary, that puts that car 7th overall, but still 4th in its group currently. It's where you finish in your group that accumulates the championship points. And here's the lead battle for Group GTH. So this is it, heading round through Redgate Corner. The number 1 car leading it, which is going to be Josh Jackson, but right behind him is the number 74 car, which is Charles Clark, who's largely been competing in the Porsche Sprint Challenge this year, the Visit Cayman Islands Porsche Sprint Challenge, but he's got right on his tailpipes another McLaren. That's number 26 car in the hands of Tom Rawlings for this race, former Mini Challenge JCW racer, who finished, I think he was 7th overall in the Mini Challenge last year, was Tom, before moving over to sports car racing. So 1st, 2nd and 3rd in Group GTH, all together fighting over what is 15th, 16th and 17th overall in the race. But a great little fight it is for all 3 podium places in Group GTH, which is for, remember, the GT4 homologated cars. And closing in on them is the number 212 Ginetta. That's a Group GTA leading car, and that for this race, the number 212 car, should be in the hands of Chris Hart, I believe. Chris, a former Fun Cup champion from, 3-4 years ago now, 2018 I think he claimed that title. So into the braking area for the Melbourne hairpin comes the lead squabble for Group GTH. As for Richard Neary, that's another car picked off now. That is now up into 6th place for Richard Neary, through and past Richard Chamberlain's Porsche, who not unsurprisingly let him go because those are cars in different groups, so Richard Chamberlain could afford to lose the place but still keep as many championship points. Another lap chalked into the book. This is going to be now 5 laps completed for the number 1 car in the hands of the reigning champion Josh Jackson, overall champion in GT Cup last year when he claimed the Group GTA title with Simon Orange, the pair of them. And Tom Rawlings now running side by side and getting through and ahead of Charles Clark. So through goes Tom Rawlings. There's a spin, I'm afraid, and that's Neil Huggins that's had the spin. Partnered up once more this weekend with Top Cats Racing, Neil, who was a regular driver with them some years ago. Partnered up with Charlotte Gilbert for this weekend. Good to see Neil back in the GT Cup after a few seasons away. Now that Tom Rawlings has unlocked the door to 2nd in Group GTH, can he hang on to it? Because Charles Clark is not going to make it easy, but it is just allowing Josh Jackson in the orange number 1 McLaren to escape up the road slightly. So that will please Josh Jackson, who lies 4th in the Sprint Cup standings at the wheel of that McLaren. The McLaren leads Group GTH in terms of the overall championship on 265 points, which I think puts it 4th overall in the championship if you add all of the groups together. But for the lead of the race, Morgan Tilbrook starting to close up, you know. He's got the fastest lap of the race, Morgan, with a 1 minute 29.708. Last time through, he was a tenth of a second slower than that, but more importantly, was still 0.8 of a second quicker than Steve Burgess could muster. So this is for the race overall. Now, both cars run in separate groups. It's a Group GTO car that leads the Radical. It's a Group GT3 car, the McLaren 750 SGT3 of Morgan Tilbrook, that sits there in second position. So has the gap come down on this lap? Yeah, it's come down by a tenth of a second in the first sector, by about a quarter of a second in the second sector. So the gap should be down to about half a second, I would have thought, by the end of this lap. Depends on how Morgan Tilbrook gets on in the third sector, but of course the closer he gets to Steve Burgess, he's then starting to run in the dirty air a little bit, and the aerodynamics of the McLaren won't like that. It works the Pirelli tyre that little bit harder as well, of course. So onto the brakes, in towards Goddard's, the final left-hander, which is really adverse camber midway through and on exit of it. Steve Burgess just gets the Radical a little bit sideways. There's traffic just up the road as well, which will be Alex Stevenson's Century Motorsport prepared Ginetta that we'll need dealing with. That car is running down towards the tail end of the field at the moment in, I think, 34th position. And also, just to confirm, James Guess's car, who we saw with damage to it, having had a trip through the gravel trap down at the old hairpin, that car is in the pit lane by the look of things. So the leaders now with traffic to deal with. Alex Stevenson will stay out of harm's way. Steve Burgess sweeps his way through before Schwantz curve. Morgan Tilbrook follows through, equally neither delayed, as they then turn their way through McLean's corner and start to accelerate their way uphill in towards the braking area for Coppice Corner. There'll be further traffic as well. That'll be Carl Cavers, the number 50 Porsche Cayman, prepared by Veluga Motorsport, that they'll need to deal with. Now that car is running in 33rd position, and that will be the next of the cars that Steve Burgess can't afford to be compromised for. As for the progress of Richard Neary, well, he got himself ahead of Tim Morley's Group GTC leading Lamborghini last time through, and is now starting to close in on the 4th place car of Seamus Jennings. Now, getting past the Lamborghini moves the Mercedes of Richard Neary from 6th to 5th, but it doesn't gain it any more points because it's still 4th in its group. It's now getting to the stage when it catches the Porsche. If it can get past that, it will be picking up extra championship points, because the Porsche runs in Group GT3, as does then the Lamborghini ahead of John Dillon. So this is an important part of the race for Richard Neary. It's a very important part of the race for Steve Burgess as well, as he works his way through and past the next little bit of traffic, and that will be another one of the GT4 McLarens that is picked off. So Steve Burgess doing a good job here. The lead advantage, though, was just 0.2 of a second as they came over the start-finish line. Up the inside of the BMW, which joins us for this weekend, staying neatly out of the way, was Jason Garrett, the Petrolhead Motorsport E46 GTR. Nice to see that car out running in its group for this weekend. But for Steve Burgess, he has managed to get a little bit of traffic now between himself and Morgan Tilbrook, so the gap will have grown whilst they thread their way through the traffic. And that's always the intriguing thing, really, about the traffic, that plays into your hands on some laps, it doesn't on others, but you've just got to keep pushing. Oh, and Richard Neary, brave, you can see in the background there, trying around the outside of Seamus Jennings, the man from Northern Ireland, and he's into the gravel trap at Coppice Corner. All of the hard work to carve his way through the order has all been rather undone. Through goes Richard Chamberlain, so Richard Neary scrambles out of the gravel, having gone rally crossing in 7th position now. He was looking to try and hoist himself up into 4th, but he's down into 7th place. Now, has that lost him any more championship points? No, it hasn't, because whilst he's dropped from 5th down to 6th and 7th, the cars that went through and passed, well, for Tim Morley it's a Group GTC Lamborghini, and for Richard Chamberlain it's a Group GTO Porsche. So didn't actually lose any championship points, but he's got dusty Pirelli tyres as the leading pair, not quite side by side, head up towards Redgate Corner. Morgan Tilbrook is trying a wider line in to try and cut back on the exit. He's got the McLaren up the inside of the Radical as they head down through the Craner curves, and Steve Burgess is trying to brave it out and still for the moment hangs on to the lead of the race with 11 minutes to go. There's more traffic just up the road that will need dealing with, and that's the number 14 McLaren that is the next of those that is going to be passed by our race leader, and that should be picked off without too much problem as they carve their way past Phil Carter, joining the GT Cup Championship for this weekend is Phil. Partnered by Michael Broadhurst, who returns to the championship. It's the 4th car now that Greystone GT are putting out in GTH alone. They've got 5 cars here this weekend, Greystone. It's great to see the fact that they're bringing drivers from performance track days through into racing, partnering them up with pros, and it's certainly working well. More traffic has been now dealt with. That is going to be another one of the Orange Motorsport Ginettas that's been dealt with. That would have been James Townsend's car that was passed by Steve Burgess. He's also now managed to get one of the Greystone McLarens between himself and Morgan Tilbrook. Not for long though, as Morgan cars his way past Richard Mason's car, the number 22, puts a lap on it. And as we now head over the start-finish line, what's Morgan Tilbrook going to do? He gets good drive this time coming out. Steve Burgess might have to go defensive here up towards Redgate Corner. In a straight line now, I think the Group GTO Radical might just have the legs on the McLaren. Tell they're in different groups just by looking at the windscreen headers of them. Now Nick Phelps there was fighting away with Roy Millington. Back towards what's going on the start-finish line. This is Tim Morley in 5th position, Richard Chamberlain in 6th position, and Richard Neary in 7th place. So 3 cars all busy squabbling away. They are all in different groups. Group GTC Lamborghini, Group GTO Orange Porsche, Group GT3 Mercedes, as they thread their way down through the Craner curves for what will be the 11th time in this race. Richard Neary looking up the inside of Richard Chamberlain. Yeah, Richard Chamberlain lets him go again. Through goes the Mercedes, gains a place. Doesn't pick up any extra championship points though as he goes through and past the car in a different group. Now, the next of the cars of Tim Morley should be dealt with. That's one of the Greystone McLarens that's just recovering onto the track, and that is also another GTH car. That's David Holloway's Century Motorsport Aston Martin. Now those two may well have had a little bit of a coming together there, because they were both not on the track but at the same part of the circuit at a similar time, so there may well have been a small little bit of contact or avoidance between the two of them as they try to avoid clattering into each other. So 8.5 minutes of the race still to go. For the lead of Group GTH, that certainly now looks to be going the way of Josh Jackson. The Titanic battle that we had has disappeared, and this is the best battle that we've got on track at the moment, which is the Ginetta of Steve Burgess fighting away with Morgan Tilbrook. Car up the road that we'll be dealing with is the slightly battered Ginetta of Craig Wilkins, which has had a bit of a bite taken out of the front right corner of his Ginetta GT5 Super Cup car. A man from the West Midlands, hugely experienced, has been racing Porsches and has raced in the British GT Championship, and Blancpain in the past as Craig will allow the race leaders to scythe their way by. So through goes Steve Burgess, through goes Morgan Tilbrook, but the work for both of these doesn't stop there. There's more traffic to deal with as Richard Neary gets on the inside of Tim Morley in the GTC Lamborghini and gains a place. So he's now back up into 5th position once more, Richard Neary. But as we say, no extra championship points, I'm afraid, because the cars he's passing are running in a different group. Seamus Jennings in the GCAT Racing Porsche just briefly delayed there. Met the traffic in the wrong place, I'm afraid. Nothing that the Ginetta could do about it, Patrick Collins. Tim Morley under pressure from Richard Chamberlain. That will be for 6th and 7th positions now, and you can see just how busy the traffic is now. Now for Richard Neary, the Merc, if he can catch up with that Porsche ahead in the hands of Seamus Jennings, that is not just for overall position, that is for group position. So that would net extra championship points for Richard Neary. And remember, that Mercedes does lead the overall championship, and that's a spin. Contact with the GCAT Racing Porsche, pitches into a spin, I'm afraid. Mark Hopton's car. The Greystone McLaren will recover. A little bit of damage to the tail end of it, but I think that was Seamus Jennings. Missed his braking point there, or was caught out by where the McLaren braked. Made contact with it, pitched it into a spin. Through goes Richard Neary, picks up 4th position, and rather than being 4th in the group, now he's now 3rd in the group. So Richard Neary, extra championship points heading his way. Not all of the cars are running in the full championship. Some of them are just in the invitation class, and actually, thinking about it, Seamus Jennings is one of those, so that wouldn't actually gain any extra championship points for Richard Neary, because the car he's just got past runs in the invitation class for this weekend. There goes number 67, That is Simon Orange. He currently lies, and runs wide and into the gravel trap at Coppice Corner. Needs to keep his foot down and try and drag the car out of the gravel trap. He was in 22nd position and second in Group GTA. He recovers, but through goes Craig Wilkins and picks up second in the group now. So he will rejoin, I think, down in 24th position there. Simon Orange lost a couple of places. Now the next of the cars Richard Neary needs to catch, again, will be pole position. That will be for championship points. The number 61 McLaren of John Dillon's not too far ahead. Love the wheels on the number 78 car, which is Tim Docker, former Volkswagen Racing Cup and TCR driver. We've got 5 minutes of the race still to go. Steve Burgess leads Morgan Tilbrook by nearly a second now. The gap has come out through the traffic. This is the gap back to third and fourth, just coming out of Goddard's corner. The blue and Dayglow green McLaren of John Dillon coming under pressure now from Richard Neary. This is for third position, and it's for second and third in Group GT3. Both of these cars are in for the full championship season, so this now is for championship points. And Richard Neary, is he going to be able to unpick John Dillon? He's having a look up the inside of the Lamborghini. John Dillon makes it easy for him going in towards the old hairpin, but Richard Neary almost ran wide coming out, and that was another opportunity for John Dillon maybe to attack, but I think he's decided that the Merc is quicker, maybe easier, rather than try and slow it up and hold yourself up. Sit behind it, see if it can drag you along and see what might happen with 4 minutes to go. So Richard Neary, who's had a real yo-yo of a race, wasn't he? Qualified, or Sam did, at least on pole position in the qualifying session this morning. Was leading the race up towards Redgate Corner, dropped it wide and onto the grass, ended up something like, what was it, 10th, 11th at the end of the first lap. Fought his way back up to 5th, was looking for 4th, went into the gravel trap at Coppice, dropped back down through the orders, now has to carve his way back through again. So there's plenty of stories for Richard to tell as to how the race has gone. But at the moment, it does look as though that car now is, despite all of its difficulties it's had, on for an overall podium position. Long way behind these two cars, which still continue to lead. A flash of the lights from Morgan Tilbrook as they carve their way past the Make It Happen Ginetta of Chris Hart for what I think will be the second time in this race. And then down through the Craner curves. They're on lap number 15 at the moment, and the lead advantage has been whittled down to just a quarter of a second now between Steve Burgess and Morgan Tilbrook. So more traffic to deal with. They will head up towards the braking area of McLean's Corner and look to try and carve their way past. That's Tom Rawlings' car for the second time. So the Paddock Motorsport McLaren will stay out of the way. Through goes Steve Burgess. Morgan Tilbrook, I think, briefly delayed just to make sure that the gap was going to be open for him still when he got there. And then there's a little bit of spare daylight for a period of time before they then catch up with the next of the cars, which is going to be the car that leads Group GTH at the moment, and that will be the number 1 McLaren. The number 14 McLaren we're looking at there. That's the extra car that Greystone have brought in for this weekend. Phil Carter rolling up his sleeves and slugging it out with James Townsend. They're further down through the order, those two, down in, I think James Townsend is something like 27th position, whereas the number 14 Ginetta, I think, is a lap ahead of it. But for nose to tail for the lead of the race, and heading on to the penultimate lap of the race it will be this time through. So Steve Burgess goes past the Group GTH leading McLaren. So the orange McLaren coming towards us leads Group GTH. The McLaren in the background is second in the group, so that's the advantage in the group that Josh Jackson has. But there's no real advantage for Steve Burgess. The 0.3 of a second between himself and Morgan Tilbrook equates to about, what, 2-3 car lengths at most between the Radical and the McLaren as they came over the start-finish line. It stretches out a little bit more as they head down through the Craner curves. But Steve Burgess looking to try and hang on to the lead of the race. Now himself and Ben Dimmock so far this year have had plenty of group wins, something like 6 group wins over the course of the season, but they've not had an overall win so far this year in the GT Cup Championship, and neither has Morgan Tilbrook, who is now looking to try and take the lead of the race. Compromised was Steve Burgess through McLean's Corner and up towards Coppice Corner. He's still got the inside line, the all-important inside line, and in a straight line that Radical has got a bit more puff than the GT3 homologated McLaren that sits alongside, because of course the Radical does run in Group GTO, open specification cars, so you can take the restrictors off them in reality. So Burgess leading, having to work overtime to try and hang on the lead of the race. So parks the car on the apex of the corner to try and get cleanly off it. The best overall result that Steve Burgess and Ben Dimmock, who shared this car all season, have had in the GT Cup was second position at Silverstone on the Grand Prix circuit last time out. They also took a third there, but are they on course for their first win of the season, or might Morgan Tilbrook grab his first win of the season? We've seen Morgan racing in GT Cup all season, but they've been racing in a Group GTH Mercedes-Benz, which runs in the GT4 specification, whereas now they are up to the GT3 category for this weekend and in their McLaren. So down through the crane of curves, we're into the final few seconds of the race. The clock will have ticked to 0. Now, did Richard Chamberlain have an issue there at the wheel of his Porsche? Just wondering whether that might be why we picked up on him coming slowly out. Yeah, he lost 2 places on the previous lap, did Richard Chamberlain, so I'm not sure. In fact, he's lost another place on that lap, so I don't think the Porsche is all well, I'm afraid. Here is Richard Neary. He is on course for 3rd position. He might be 16 seconds adrift of the leading pair, but it's at least got that car back to the sharp end of the order and second in the group. After, as I say, what was a great qualifying session by Sam Neary, his son, that qualified the car to pole, but for Richard it all came unravelled a bit at the first corner. But for the checkered flag, we should very shortly see Steve Burgess and Morgan Tilbrook, who are still side by side heading in towards the Melbourne hairpin, fighting it out. There's one more roll of the dice for Morgan Tilbrook. Can he do anything about Steve Burgess on the run up towards Goddard's corner? I don't think he'll beat him on the way out of the corner, because the Radical seems to have a bit more grunt coming out of the corner. There's a car off in the background at the approach towards the chicane, but it is going to be Steve Burgess that comes through to claim the first overall win for himself and Ben Dimmock and the Raw Motorsports crew. Tom Rawlings is, I'm afraid, that's gone off at the wheel of the car that was second in Group GTH. Tom Rawlings heard the squeal of tyres, but the McLaren is in the gravel and going nowhere. So Steve Burgess claims the win, Morgan Tilbrook second, Richard Neary comes through in 3rd position. The Lamborghini in the background, the blue car with the green flashes, is John Dillon, who's there in 4th position. Seamus Jennings in the Porsche finishes in 5th, and Tim Morley will pick up the Group GTC honours, finishing in 6th place in the number 41 car in the Lamborghini. 7th place over the start finish line it goes the Nissan of Graham Tilley, the number 4 car. 8th place should be the Porsche of Richard Chamberlain. Here it comes now towards the checkered flag. 9th place should be Paul Bailey at the wheel of the McLaren Can-Am as well, that I was telling you about earlier on. A very rare car. Even some of the teams that are running McLarens in this series have never seen one of the Can-Ams. It's chassis number 1 of the 3 that was ever built. But for that car there, there comes the Can-Am over the start-finish line now. Paul Bailey finishes in 9th place. 10th place in the end for Warren Gilbert. That keeps that car's championship hopes alive at the moment. Outside of the top 10, the number 35 Porsche of Nick Phelps should head towards the start-finish line shortly. That will claim 14th position. Should pick up the win in Group GTB. Here it comes now, the white car with its pink flashes, tucked up behind Roy Millington's Ferrari. But for Nick Phelps, that is the man who leads the Sprint Cup Championship and claims another group win in that race. So that does his championship hopes for the Sprint Cup no harm at all. And the winner of Group GTH should be the number 1 McLaren of Josh Jackson, which should be coming over the start-finish line very shortly. That will be the final group winner, and I think it might also be almost the last car to take the checkered flag, or no, it's already done so. It's already gone through to claim the checkered flag and the win in Group GTH. So for Steve Burgess, he makes his way in towards the pit lane. He is the overall winner and the winner of Group GTO as well. For Morgan Tilbrook, it might have been second on the road, but it's the win in Group GT3 from them. And as we say, that is just the first of 4 races this weekend for the GT Cup Championship, which has been in rude health in 2021. The calendar will the calendar will be shortly announced for 2022, and by the sounds of things, we are in for another mega season of racing in the 2022 GT Cup Championship. But that is just the first of 4 races this weekend, and remember, this isn't even the final racing weekend for GT Cup, because the championship will conclude in just 2 weekends' time on the 2nd and 3rd of October in Norfolk at Snetterton on the 300 circuit, with event number 7 of the season, and that'll be rounds 21, 22, 23 and 24 before we can start to fully declare our champions for this season. So hoping we might be able to run you down through a result or two. We'll just await and see whether we might be able to get the graphics up. We have had a few little small technical issues with some of the data feeds that we've been getting on the graphics, so apologies for that. That's why we didn't see a great deal of graphics coming up over the course of that race, but I'm hoping that we might be able to give you a full rundown of the order if we can get the graphics up in just a few moments time. If not, I can certainly guide you through the way that the cars will have finished. You can see how busy the pit lane is. 38 cars to deal with. So let's just run you through the order then. Confirmation of the results. We won't be able to do it with a graphic, but it is number 7 Steve Burgess that claims the win from 66 Morgan Tilbrook in second place, and third place is number 88 Richard Neary. Fourth place is 61 John Dillon. Fifth goes away with 33 Seamus Jennings, and sixth, the winning Group GTC, goes away with number 41 Tim Morley. Seventh was Graham Tilley. Eighth place was Richard Chamberlain's Porsche. Ninth place was Paul Bailey's McLaren, and completing the top 10 was number 9 Warren Gilbert. Group winners outside of the top 10. In 14th place, the Group GTB win went the way of number 35 Nick Phelps. The Group GTH win went the way of number 1, which was Josh Jackson, and the Group GTA win went the way of car number 212, which finished in 16th position, and that would have been Chris Hart. And that guides you through the results and our group winners that fall outside of the top 10. So that's it for the moment from the GT Cup. I think we're going to grab a quick word with Steve Burgess. Is down there in the pit lane. He'll be absolutely delighted that he has claimed his first win of the season, and I'm hoping we might be able to grab a quick word with him as the pit lane fills up, and we'll just await confirmation as to whether we're going to grab a quick word with Steve Burgess or whether the car has disappeared straight into Parc Ferme and Steve is being held there. It'd be a great opportunity to grab a quick word with him. We'll certainly try and chat to a few more of the drivers over the course of tomorrow, but it will be a great thing to maybe grab a quick word with Steve. Or if we can't get Steve, then we might be able to grab a word with perhaps Morgan Tilbrook, who did some really good things at the wheel of the Enduro Motorsport McLaren, and we can perhaps gauge his view on how different the McLaren is in GT3 specification compared to the GT4 Mercedes that he's been largely used to racing in the GT Cup Championship in 2021. And we'll have to wait and see. So we'll see whether we can have a chat to them. Now, I don't think we're going to get the chance to chat to any of the drivers down there, and we'll just hang on for a few more moments just to see whether we're going to grab a word. But I think we are confirmed that no, we're not going to get the opportunity. All the drivers have been gathered up, I'm afraid, for the various podium presentations and have had to go to scrutineering for the regulatory checks. So that is it for the moment. Apologies we didn't chat to any of the drivers, but don't go anywhere, because we will be back with more GT Cup Championship racing here at Donington Park. Our pit stop race is scheduled to take place at 16:25, 25 minutes past 4 this afternoon. So we look forward to that. For the meantime, though, from the GT Cup here at Donington Park, it's goodbye.